Good afternoon. My name is Alina Shaltsova. I am an immigration attorney from Brooklyn, New York. Today's legally speaking seminar is dedicated to asylum and how to request asylum in the United States. First of all, for somebody to request asylum in the United States, the person has to be physically in the United States or at the port of entry, meaning airport or a border of the United States with an official checkpoint, so the person can request asylum. It is not possible to request asylum status if the person is outside of the United States. If you are outside of the United States, you can request a refugee status, and it's a little bit different procedure, and there is a difference between, at least at some point, a status of refugee and an asylee in the United States. So to request asylum, let's say you are at the port of entry, you need to submit yourself to the officer of custom, usually it's a CBP officer, Custom and Border Protection Officer, and state that you would like to apply for asylum in the United States. What's going to happen next is you're probably going to be detained, and you will have to wait for something called credible fear interview. Credible fear interview is a procedure at which an asylum officer is going to decide whether or not you can meet a necessary threshold to allow you to file your application. So you will be asked, of course, about yourself, why you would like to receive asylum in the United States, and what is the grounds for asylum, and why and how you appear at the border. So that's called a credible fear interview. Remember, usually you're detained at the immigration federal facility during this process, but it happens only if you are surrendering yourself at the border, or if you got picked up by ICE immigration officers while you're in the United States and you don't have legal status. There can be different variations what happens with one when they're picked up by ICE when they're in the United States already, but I will just focus in this particular seminar on asylum procedure and different regulations that are relevant to asylum. So you pass credible fear interview. What happens next? The officers, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is going to determine whether or not you're eligible for bond, and they will set an amount of bond, immigration bond, that can be paid for you to be out of the detention. Now, you still have not filed for asylum at this point. The filing for asylum starts only when you submit Form I-589. You can file the form at USCIS website. It is free. There is no filing charge for this form by the government. Lawyers may charge for an assistance to fill out the form and represent you, but the form itself is free. You should, if you're doing it by yourself, you should read instructions to the form carefully, because you need to submit an original of the form and copies, depending on who is applying with you, or you're applying by yourself. Then it will determine the number of copies that you have to submit. You will need to submit an original photo, passport style photo, and preferably at the time of filing you should also submit evidence in support of your asylum claim. That's what you need to submit to start the application. What to do if you're in court? There are two different places that can have jurisdiction over asylum claims. The first one is USCIS, Asylum Office with USCIS, and the second one is Immigration Court. If you're in Immigration Court, you will need to submit this form with the Immigration Court. Recent changes to the Immigration Court practice manual now allow for submission of the form with the Immigration Court, even if you do not have, even if it doesn't happen during the Immigration Court hearing, because before the changes you could submit the form and start the official time for submission of the asylum. Only when you are at the Immigration Court hearing, you are at the hearing you have the hearing. Because nowadays, United States immigration courts are so busy. Sometimes a person has to wait to submit the form much longer than the deadline imposed by the regulations when you have to submit the form. Now, a very important point. One who came to the United States must submit asylum application within 1 year of his or her arrival or entry to the United States. It is very important not to miss this deadline. Sometimes it is possible to restore the deadline, but it's very difficult, and I do not recommend risking missing the 1 year deadline. So regardless where you are at, who has the jurisdiction over you, US Immigration Court or USCIS Asylum Office, the form has to be submitted within 1 year of entry. In the United States, an asylum applicant does not have any special privileges in that there is no shelter for asylum applicants. There is no temporary allowance in terms of money, medical insurance, or any social benefits. The person is basically on her or his own while the application is pending. The only benefit that is given to applicants is ability to work and employment authorization that one can file for once his or her application is pending for 6 months. You can file for an employment authorization a little bit earlier, 150 days prior to 180 days necessary time pending, with the application pending, but your application for work authorization will not be granted unless 180 days pass from the time you filed for asylum. What happens next? Well, next is basically after you file, is wait. How long one can wait? It all depends. Nowadays, usually one has to wait for about 2 years to be called for an interview. It's a very long time. And during this time, it is not recommended that you travel out of the United States. It is possible, unless you're in immigration court proceedings, to travel outside while the application for asylum is pending, but it's not recommended because for travel while asylum is pending, you would need to apply for something called advance parole. And on every advance parole and instructions to advance parole, it says that advance parole does not guarantee the parole entry back into the United States once you leave the United States. So it's very important not to jeopardize your chances of getting asylum in the United States. Once you are called for an interview, you will need to appear for an interview. Do not miss a date. If you are going to, if you need more time, let's say you're not ready, something happened, you really cannot testify that day, you will still have to appear and request an adjournment of the day. And what happens at this point is your asylum clock for work authorization is going to stop if it is you who requests an adjournment or delay or a new date for your asylum interview with USCIS. So if 180 days that I just talked about, if that time has not passed yet by the time you're called for an interview, and you would like to adjourn the interview or delay the interview, postpone it, you risk to lose a chance for an employment authorization in the United States. Asylum laws in the United States are very complicated, I would say. If you're not a practitioner, if you're not a lawyer or somebody who has been through this process many different times, you would not know all these little things that may jeopardize the process. So you should really work with somebody, or you should at least read online. There are many great resources online about asylum and how and what you need to do and what you should not be doing. If you pass your interview, and usually decision is ready in 2 weeks after your interview, you will receive a letter stating that your asylum application was granted, and you will receive a status, and 1 year later you will be able to apply for a green card in the United States. If you do not pass your asylum interview that you had with USCIS Asylum Office, you will be transferred to court if by that time you do not have legal status in the United States. You will be placed in defensive, you can apply for defensive asylum now, in connection with your immigration removal proceedings. And now the judge will decide whether or not to grant your application for asylum. In court, you can rely on the same asylum application that you filed with USCIS. You can make corrections to it. You can add some more evidence. So there are different things that you can do to improve your claim in court. But the court is going to consider your claim what's called de novo, again, as if the court does not know what happened. And of course the court knows what happened in USCIS asylum office. If your application is granted by the judge, again, you're going to receive asylum status. You will be able to apply for green card 1 year later. If not, what are possibilities? Well, you can appeal the decision with the Board of Immigration Appeals, or you will be removed. So ordered removed, basically you're going to be ordered to be removed, deported from the United States. You can read more information about the procedure, different aspects of filing for asylum on our website, www.shoutsova.com. If you are thinking about asylum, even if your deadline is missed, you should read all available online resources and make an appointment with a lawyer, any lawyers that you can find, because one mistake can cost you your asylum application to be approved, and it's very important that you try to avoid mistakes. Thank you very much. I hope this video was helpful, and visit our Facebook page and our website for more information on asylum procedures in the United States.